Go live, we shall go live with Mussonlini's Mare Nostrum cruisers. We're going live. Hello everyone, my name's Dr. Clarke. I am your, leading historian for this evening, in that I'll be leading you through the wonderful world that is, the Italian Navy and their cruiser selection in the interwar years in the 1920s and 30s. And it's going to start off by taking a grand old while to get to the actual cruisers, because, believe it or not, there are a lot of factors which have to be considered in before I can get to the cruisers. And also, I have to remember this. Hello. I'm on a slightly different side. Now, I have to explain what I've done. So, I have my notes on a screen here. And I have the screen which has the broadcasting here. So, my hope is that I can make this all be organized. My hope is. Reality might be different. The reality is, I might do that and move things about again, because frankly I keep trying to make it look correct, but that shows I haven't finished off that corner. It's just, there's no advantage really at certain points, but that's better. So, hello everyone, how are we all doing? And again, I'm losing me. Give me a second to just make this happy, or rather make me happy with this. Yeah, that's better. Hello. There will be no Smorgy time. I've been told if there is Smorgy time, there will be no more Alex time, in that Alex will cease to exist as a human being and will become more like a mist of particles. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, William Cox. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Night 681. Smorgy time. Don't forget to put up. No. There is. I have a gate up there. It's just he's worked out how to get round or over the gate. Doctrine, yes. G3s were supposed to use 16.5-inch or 16-inch guns. They were designed to potentially have both or either, depending on quite what happened. Nice. What G3 supposed to use 16.5 or 16-inch guns? Probably going to be 16-inch guns, but they were capable of taking 16.5. Hello, Naval. Hello, Night 6831. Honestly, if the Royal Navy had 16.5-inch guns in service by the time the treaty happened, then the treaty would probably set the limit at 16.5 inches, which would have made the whole developing an 18-inch gun even more interesting. I see. For one, would I be right given that even if Zara and Pola had been captured, the extent of damage Zara took, she wouldn't make it to Alexandria and flounder, but Pola would? I'm sure they'd have found a way. Honestly, if the British had decided to capture it and had decided to, and sorry, it's just the computer just fell off something. So if I do that and that, I know I'm a bit in the dark. Let's see if I can put the light on without causing strobing, shall we? This is the trouble with having spent the day painting. I've still only really got half my office space. So if that starts to cause strobing, tell me, and I'll get rid of it. But let's hope it doesn't. Or I might actually end up having to do a swap around of the screens. Give me a second. Sorry about this, everyone, but give me a second. What I'll do is I'll do this. And can I do some magic movement? Day. Between dealing with a corgi who is intent on making himself blue by whatever means necessary. Seriously, I think he's obsessed with it. I should never have let him watch the Smurfs movie. He watched the Smurfs movie and ever since has been obsessed with turning blue. Right then. We now have the screen on that side. We have that side. We have that all plugged in. We have everything hopefully working, he says. Hopefully working as it's supposed to. Right then. Hello everyone. Hang on, where's my mouse? That could be problematic. The mouse has disappeared. So, well, that's a bit of a weird look, isn't it? But I have a plan to solve this one. Or shall I do... And go to layout effects, layout, and flip back. And then if, hang on. Sorry about this. But it's only when I did a live I suddenly realised that, oh good lord, that the actual issue with it. Hello everyone, yes, you might have noticed that you're not becoming a smoodle, okay? You're staying here. You fluffy thing. I don't know. Never show dogs Smurfs, okay? They get ideas in their heads about becoming smoodles and smorgies. Now my Iron Brew's a long way away from me. I don't know. We will sort this all out. We will sort this all out. Move the Iron Brew closer. That's the important thing. The Iron Brew is closer, and you can all hear me. We're all good. Hello, Poodle. Hello, Tenafika. Hello, 9681. I answered that one. William Cox. Weird. Was listening to a song in G and you came in singing in key. Sweet. Hello, Dan Brim. I think the plan was fairly early on for 16.5 inch. I'm not sure if it had been prototyped or not. They had some ideas for it. Hello. Right. Good luck, Stafford. Don't worry. I can't remember. Nice orange colour on the walls. Just admit if you painted undiluted iron brew undiluted iron brew syrup. No, but I did paint with the closest thing I could find, which is Supreme Eggshell, apparently, by Vinto Luxury Paint, which came from Amazon, so I'm not sure how luxury it is. Paul Westwing, good evening, Dr. C. It looks like you were correct with regards to the naval strike missile for the Royal Navy. Oh, please don't give me laurels for that. That really wasn't the finest work or hour for me to actually manage to work that one out. It's a case of no one's really surprised. If anyone is surprised, they're lying. Hello, Sea Dodders. Hello, Senator Canera. Hello, Jonathan Barrow. Do you think the Trentos would have been better with 888s? Probably. Why not get the dogs to go on a Smurf hunt? Because if they went on a Smurf hunt, then I would get told off. And it would be my fault. It would all be my fault. Always my fault. Anyway, so why have I got this particular image up next to me? Because these are the patron suggestions, and whilst I'm live this evening, the patron vote should go live. And I wanted you to see that there were 3 pages of suggestions. 3. About a page worth came from Wayne Borean alone. Quite a large chunk came from Cody, Bijon, and Robert Locke. Thank you very much, everyone who put in questions. I'm limited to roughly 20 in once it gets a patron. So what I tend to do is, if you stuck in multiple, I go through and pick my favorite 2. If you've only stuck in one, then barring, and as you all know, my criteria for the patron vote is that I can actually be able to do it in a week. So I can put together the research. Sometimes I'm lucky. You will suggest a topic, like if we talk about Glenn Stewart, he's like cruisers and cruiser actions of the Spanish-American War, which I actually have some slides for already. The reason I have some slides for that already is because, believe it or not, it used to be part of a lecture I used to give at King's when I was doing my bachelor, when I was doing my PhD. So I could do that one, but in fact, there's none here this week I couldn't really do in a week. I have to admit, there was a couple which didn't make it on that criteria from the multiples. The maple syrup sauerkraut war, for example, from Wayne Borian. That would just take too much time for me to be able to do in a week. If I had a longer time notice, i.e., if let's put it this way, if for some reason I said, I'll do one of these massive ones from there in October or November, especially if it's after the hoped for writing week I'm supposed to be getting in October, where I'm basically toddling off to do phys and writing for an entire week. Yeah, I could possibly take on the entire Royal Canadian Navy being rebuilt by Thrawn and Palion. But yeah, that would take time. But otherwise, it's full of good suggestions, and it was 3 pages of very good suggestions, and I was very pleased with it. So anyway, what is his preferred method of turning blue? His preferred method of turning blue is finding the nearest can of blue paint and diving headfirst into it. Speaking of which, I have to make sure that particular can of blue paint is hidden. Ah, yes. The can of blue paint, safely enough, is on top of a set of steps. He doesn't climb. He climbs stairs quite happily, but steps, no. So the step ladder, it's fine. It's slightly worrying that a supposedly colourblind Tafra wants to be a smorgy. Considering my dogs, if I tell them to go to their coloured toy, they know exactly what colour toy that is, what toy that is. They might associate a name with a smell, but they say it does make one wonder about whether they can see shades of grey. Remember, do you think the Trendos would have been better for Triple Eights? Honestly, if the Italians had gone all out, they could have got some very interesting 8-inch cruisers, because I honestly think as long as they kept to the numbers required, the British honestly wouldn't have bothered. It would wound up the French something chronic, but the British wouldn't have bothered too much. Mainly because for the British, it's always they accept their cruisers are never going to be same one for one as their opponents, because they require so many to cover the world. Just carefully watch the fluff. He also, his favorite trick is to turn on the radiator. But so I think they could have got away with it. It would have been interesting to see, but they have this guy called Bonotti, who is obsessed with 4 twin turrets, 8 guns or more, but 4 twin turrets. And many ways is the theorist who's writing the checks that the rest of the Navy's cashing. Hello, Roblox. Hello, Gogolander. But no, it's good. There is one problem with having my screens around this way, so I now have the screen. So I look like I'm when I'm reading my notes, I look like I'm looking towards the slide. There's a problem with it. The actual the laptop is sitting here now. But the mouse comes out of that side of the screen to get to the thing. Get to it. And it's just a bit weird sometimes. Oh well. Consider this. Allowing the Italians to wind up the French is a very British thing to do. Oh, yes. Anyway, let's get into the Italian cruisers, and let's start off with Italy itself. Now, before we can talk about the joyous thing that is all the structures that run Italy from 1922 onwards, we have to consider the Italian state as it was before then. And the factions of the Italian state which precede the fascist state and which continue to hold power well into the fascist state. And a critical part of that is the army. Now, this was an earlier officer in sort of earlier period, but not an earlier officer, because Gaetano Ghierandi, it ends up getting Marshal of Italy thanks to Mussolini, who likes that title. It's a good way of retiring a general. Make them a Marshal of Italy, promote them. They have a lovely status. They therefore can never retire, but they also are retired effectively. It is not possible that Italy be brought to the level of a neutral Switzerland. Italy is a great power and cannot forget her political, historical, geographical, demographic position. Nor for nothing does the Swiss army have the proven glories of Carso, di Isonzo, the Piave, and Grappa. Okay, so here is the thing. The Italian army, the Italian military as a whole, comes out of World War I with a massive, absolutely rock-stomping, global-beating, bashing of anything ego. They really do. They come out of World War I with a massive, massive ego. They come out of World War II crushed to an extent. But they come out of World War I with a massive ego, especially the higher echelons. It's one of the interesting things. If you talk to people from the lower down, who were the infantry and the soldiers, Italy has a traumatic and horrendous war. If you talk to the people who were the generals, it has a great and glorious war. I know. That's the reality of what they're talking about. So, this is a statement produced in response to someone suggesting that perhaps the Italian army, instead of concentrating on being numerically massive in terms of number of people, might want to focus some funds on, I don't know, tanks, mechanization, motorization, actually advancing into the modern century, actually admitting that their combined cavalry brigades, which involve tanks, cavalry, and I mean this literally horseback cavalry, and armored cars, didn't work, and suggesting that they go for a sort of a mass reserve force. So instead of having a smaller colonel standing force and a larger, wider reserve force they can call upon in a major war, no, that is hated. That is despised. That is talk of treachery. That is talk of being Switzerland. Admittedly, that was the fact Switzerland came into it is the fault of the person who proposed it, because they actually mentioned Switzerland. But we always think of Japan as the prima military state, where the military pretty much are calling the shots. Well, Italy is not that much different, because the generals and the admirals, especially the generals, hold a lot of power. They hold a lot of influence. And in many regards, they're the ones who select the fascist party, not the other way around. And they select them because they're prepared to provide the money. The other thing the fascists do is they provide the militia, which allows them to actually build up their numbers. It's amazingly useful, the fascist, but a fascisti party, to the assistance of the Italian army. And in return, the Italian army tolerates them. They don't support them, they tolerate them. Colin Cameron, will you be talking about Mussolini's most insane idea, which would have been made the Italian Navy redundant? He bought into the plan to drain the Mediterranean. No, because this is just about their cruisers. If I diverted to every single random stupid idea these various politicians of these countries, whenever I was doing cruisers, came up with for their foreign policy, I would never actually get to discuss the ships, and I find the ships a lot more interesting than I do their foreign policy. Seneca Nero, the honor of Izonzo. Yeah, don't get me started. How would the British capture Zara when they've turned her into a flaming wreck with 4 15-inch broadsides from War Corgi and 15 from Valiant and torpedoed by HMS Stuart? Well, they probably wouldn't have torpedoed her if they'd been going to capture her. They might still. Christopher, Italy accomplishes anything. Yay, we're Rome again. Not quite, but yeah. Brian 418. Transitory periods are always fun. They are. Carl goes, after the third or fourth Battle of Isonzo, talking about glory near the front was not advisable, and there were more like 10 to come. It's just don't go there. At least the other areas that arise that are fun. They can be. The ships are far more interesting policies. Yes, they are. So, how do I put this politely? The Italian army is powerful. The Italian army is really powerful. And this guy is the governor of Fiume in 1924 when he says this. In 1924. Now, the thing about this gentleman, when he says this in 1924, is that he is well into the period when Mussonlini is theoretically in power. He is Prime Minister of Italy from 1922 to July 1943. Please note, though, he's Prime Minister. And there is a difference going on here. Yes, he is a dictator. But, and I say this in the politest way, he is more a primus inter pares, a first amongst equals, to use the Roman phrase, which he would have loved so much, than an actual dictator. This is one of the interesting things when you're dealing with the Italian forces and the Italian operations. In many ways, the fascists don't create the events and some of the attitudes the Italians exhibit, especially to some of the African peoples they conquer. It's more they give license to it. It's already there. Because, especially amongst certain senior officers, they are really, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, really, really nuts. They are. They make my squirrel, and for those who don't realise what I'm talking about, I have a squirrel called Nuts, who I've had since I was a very, very young boy, and who got burnt instead of me at one point. So I consider him still. Let's put it this way: I'm not sure if he is lucky, but I know, nicest way, I do tend to take him with me when I travel abroad, just because, just in case. He's light enough to carry. It's not going to affect the weight allowance. If it is helpful, good. If not, it doesn't matter. But they make him, and I'm not talking about imaginary, I'm talking stuffed animal. They make a stuffed animal look like a sane, conversant creature. They really do. I do not know what was happening in Italian staff colleges in about 1910 to 1912, but by gum, the some of the people that turn up in the 1920s spout a lot of tosh. Yes. Well, how do I put it? The Duke da Costa, the Unbeaten. There are so many of the. This is another trouble I have with the Condottieri. The Condottieri are named for supposedly great generals, the Italian past. Half of them seem to be named for generals of World War One who need their how do I put this? Their PR sorted out. And well, there's this book which I'm going to recommend unreservedly, which is Mussonlini and his generals in his armed forces, the fascist regime, and fascist foreign policy 1940 to 1940 by John Gooch. It's really worth a read. It was published in 2007, the version I have, and it's very good. Anyway. So, if I read a bit to you all, hopefully you'll find it interesting. In Athens' strange circumstances, not least in respect of its merchant fleet, which had lost 2/3 of its tonnage during the war and which was now half the size it had been in 1914, restraint was the order of the day. Notwithstanding the calls of the nationalists, the right in heavy industry for a large fleet to support a policy of commercial expansion in the Balkans, Levant, and Africa, Secchi loyally followed Premier Francisco Nitti's economical line of demobilization and strict limits to arms manufactures. The Navy was cut back in size from 120,000 to 34,000 men. Construction of the only one of 4 wartime super dreadnoughts still on the slipway, the Caracola, was halted, and the 4 old battleships and 15 cruisers were condemned. The impression that the war in the Adriatic had made on the minister was evident in his first normal post-war budget, announced on 25th of November 1920. Sums of 536 million lira for ordinary expenditure and 311 million lira for extraordinary expenditure were to be spent on 8 mine layers, 4 destroyers, 4 submarines, and 8 mass torpedo boats. Now, interesting enough, this causes all sorts of disputes, including, of course, it causes Romeo Bernotti to come up with what is sometimes argued by some people as being the first outline of a fast battleship. These people, of course, conveniently forget the first outline of the Queen Elizabeth class, which would have had them at 28 knots. But, we'll leave that to one side. And the Francisco Caracola class, to be honest. There is actually an admiral who puts this forward. In Chamber of Deputies, Secchi is attacked by Vice Admiral Mare de Ast for having reduced the fleet to a minimum when he could have reconditioned old battleships for a relatively modest sum of 50 million naira each. 1/6 for the cost of a new one. Here is the point I would like to make in defense of Secchi here. A, if you could recondition a battleship to be from pre-World War I standard to World War II to World War II standard, especially one of the Italian battleships, for 50 million, or post-World War I standard for 50 million, I would be very, very surprised with the Italian industry at the time. And 2, that for 4 old battleships would cost 200 million lira. Now, considering they have a budget of 847 million lira for the entire Navy at that time, you're either talking about putting the budget up to over 1 billion lira, 1.047 billion if you want to be precise, but what's 47 million lira between friends, Or, alternatively, you are taking a quarter of the existing budget. The trouble is, as Vice Admiral Umberto Cagni put it, who was a national hero as a result of his having snatched possession of Tripoli and started a Libyan war in 1911. Important thing for the Navy because he'd won this victory. Told the Senate that capital ships were the foundation for the preparation of certain defense of the patria, of its commerce, and of its life. Reminding people that heavy warships were not defunct, pointing out that Great Britain, the United States, and Japan were still building battleships, and that they remained the backbone of major fleets, notwithstanding the development of torpedoes and sea airplanes. The era of great warships is over only for states which, like today's Italy, do not have the financial means to build them. Well, you see, the thing is, when they point about the financial means to build them, they mean that the government budget. Here is the problem. Japan leaves World War One with the idea that they've won a great victory and they had a wonderful war and a very bad economy. But there's the reasons for that are entirely their own. The Italians leave World War One with an economy which has been devastated by war and the effects of war on its population, with all the issues of adjusting their industry that go with that, with the probably one of the most active communist revolutionary organizations of any European power outside of Russia. All that internal dissent because of their conduct in the war, and yet you still have these leaders, this nobility, the ruling class, believe they won the war. It was wonderful. They've got this great honor of these battles, and they have all the money in the world. And what happens is slowly, and this is something that brings Mussolini to power, they keep shooting the messenger who says no until they get one who never says no. And in return, they'll let him do whatever he wants, as long as it doesn't cause them trouble, and as long as he never says no to them. And that is Mussolini. Mussolini is not so much a fascist dictator as a fascist cloak for an aristocratic government. And it's not an aristocratic as in the traditional aristocracy. It's an aristocratic in the terms of the military and industrial hierarchy. Now, why am I calling them a aristocracy rather than a oligarchy? Well, because in an oligarchy, it tends to be power you develop in industrial. In an aristocracy, it's power you inherit. And most of these people are in their positions because of their inherited power, not because of their real power. It's kind of like the Venetian version of an aristocracy. And the questions, for some reason, have disappeared on me. So let me just make sure to get it back. Hello, everyone. William Cox, I really didn't need to know about Joe Camel. I was quite happy about not having that image in my mind. Oh, Go Lander, I do. In Italy, we had the Duke da Costa, who the unbeaten, that was beaten at Caberta, at Tagliamento, ran away to Venice, and wasn't cut out just thanks to the other beaten divisions covering his retreat. Well, yeah. To be honest, there are different scenarios going on in various countries at this point. And we have to be quite cautious about which countries you draw analysis from, because each one has their own individual things going on. And one of the points I will make repeatedly in this, and which I've made in the long patrol, which is recorded and written up now, so you know, you have to be. Whilst there is definitely an argument that the word fascist is used far too much, along with communist, in modern politics and modern discourse to try and discredit people just because you disagree with them, not because they are actually them. You have to remember that whilst the movements in Italy, Spain, Germany are all sorts of different when they come to power, and they have different tenures and different timbres and different subtexts going on to do with their own cultural nuances and the realities of the situation that dictators find themselves in. Let's be honest. Hitler doesn't have to make quite as many compromises as Mussolini does, and Franco has to make far less compromises, but seeks to do far less in some respects. But there are far more fascist organizations, and the fascist movement is far wider than just those three nations. The fascisti movement is all over Europe. It's in the UK, it's in North America, it's in South America, it's in Central America. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's even in China at this time. So you have to be very careful when you start considering things. Well, how do I put this? You have to be very careful when you start trying to use that phrase today. But in 1920s and 30s, the one thing that does unite all those powers is their fascist background. That's why they're called the fascist dictatorships. They might be very different in many regards, but they are all fascist dictatorships. Now, why have I got my cruiser definition up there? Well, it's because we've got to discuss this from the point of view of Italy. Now, cruiser becomes commerce destroyers as well as commerce defenders. What's the problem for Italy? Well, if you're going to be doing commerce defense, what commerce are you defending? It ain't going in and out the Mediterranean, because if it's going in and out the Mediterranean, it has to either go via Gibraltar, in which case the Royal Navy would go, hello, or the various French Navy positions in the way, after you've got through, of course, the French-infested Western Mediterranean, or it has to go out the Suez Canal. In which case, the British will also be going, And if your primary war, and let's be honest, the primary war that the military seem to be obsessed with is fighting war with France. Again, don't take this the wrong way, but, Hitler comes to power, they're obsessed with fighting a war. The German military is obsessed with fighting a war versus the French. The Spanish wars, even before Franco comes to power in Spain, they're obsessed with fighting war versus the French. And Italians are obsessed with fighting war versus the French. If the French started to feel that they were a little bit besieged and beleaguered, I would actually understand that. The fact that they spent most of the 1920s and 30s being as bellicose and as underdefended as they do strongly suggests to me they have an amazing ability, their politicians of that generation, to stick their heads firmly in the sand. Now, with the fascist powers, there is all sorts of connections going on between them. But there is also all sorts of differences, and the big difference is this. The Germans can afford a surface raiding operation. The Italians can't. Why not? Because where is that surface raiding going to come from? It has to go through the Mediterranean, it has to either go out the Gibraltar, or it has to go out the Suez Canal. Where is any economic activity supposed to go in? Go out the Gibraltar or the Suez Canal, or come in. So, the Italians have got a distant blockade on them from the get-go. So then it's escorting convoys to Libya? That's not really that sexy, is it? With all we're considering, we've already learned about the Italian High Command and Mussolini and the Fascisti Party and the various pillars of power that are going to be involved in developing the Navy. Are any of them going to care about convoying to Libya? No. So, what does that leave for your cruisers? To be a reinforcing arm of your battle fleet? Potentially. To be surface raiders in so much as to attack into the Western Mediterranean and draw the French into your areas of combat? Possibly. As symbols of national status and power? Yep, that sounds about it. It does. And that is the case. That is what we're talking about. They're symbols of national status and power. So that reflects in your cruiser design. If they're mostly going to be operating in the Mediterranean, that's going to affect your hull design, your bow shaping. Also, in the nicest way, how much endurance do they really need if they're operating in the Mediterranean? And some of these ships have really, really disturbingly poor endurance. Keeping the sea in any weather? Mm-hmm. There's also another problem if you're not doing convoy protection, if you're a cruiser. Because if you're a power who's inclined to build for speed and firepower anyway, if your cruiser is never going to be tied to protecting merchant ships, you'll decide when you're developing it, then what do you need armor for? Because it's always going to be able to crank on the speed and do full maneuvering. It's never going to have to sit there and protect a convoy, is it? So you can afford to go for armor as light as paper. It all makes sense. Remember, they were kind of like the Japanese, wanted a great battle to beat the enemy in one move. Pretty much. They were definitely interesting, the Italians, in that they seem to be constantly planning for a war with France. I'm never quite sure how they think they're actually going to fight it. That's kind of like the French. They keep planning for a war with Italy, and I'm never quite sure how they're going to fight it. In the end, I think the French plan ultimately would actually end up resulting in them having to call Britain for help and basically beg for assistance. For the Italians, it's a defensive war almost from the get-go. It's not an offensive war. Yes, we've got the speed, we've got the elan, yeah. We can do great sorties into French territory and then run back. Because what you really don't want to end up doing is having a fight, battleship on battleship, cruiser on cruiser, when your cruisers have all got glass jaws. And I'm talking about that from both the French and the Italian perspective. The only cruisers which don't have glass jaws are the Zaras and the Abuzis. Then, why do I get the feeling BT would have fitted in well with the Italian commander this era? 2, being the standout genius among the Italian High Commanders era. BT would have probably improved the strategic thought process of the Italian High Command at various points. And does the Italian High Commanders era up to 1943 stand up as evidence that the curse Dido of the Carthage laid against Aeneas and the Romans was real rather than just made up? Can't answer that one. So, the treaties. The treaties have an impact on Italy. Now, believe it or not, no, Mussolini doesn't have a direct impact on the Washington Treaty, but he has a lot of indirect control over it and influence over it. He comes to power in October 1922. In many ways, it's a response to the treaty. The fascists had a lot of power in terms of staying back and watching what happened. The treaty, of course, stops the Italians being able to build up a massive battle fleet to beat up the French. It also makes other things problematic. And when I say other things problematic, it makes it unsuitable for the Italians to be able to claim they are greater than the French, because they're being held at level pegging. This then filters into the 1930 treaty, where, frankly, there's a reason why the Italians and the French have less restrictions in them in some ways, in fact, in many ways, than the Americans, the British, and the Japanese. Because, again, whilst the Italians are looked at as wanting to build up these things, there is something they don't do in the intervening years between 1922 and 1930. And that is something that their Roman counterparts, who they claim descendancy from, but whom, frankly, they really shouldn't, because the Romans would have done it better, would have understood. The Italians do not spend 8 years building up the necessary infrastructure to support a larger fleet. They do not spend 8 years investing in their shipyards so they can rapidly build ships. They do not spend 8 years developing their technology of ship construction and their infrastructure and logistics to support it. They do not spend 8 years building up the systems to enable them to store and maintain a fleet for even a medium war, let alone a long war. They spend 8 years grousing about everything. Let's remember, why didn't Italy under the treaty convert? Why didn't Italy not under the treaty convert the Francisco Caracola into a carrier? Honestly, because the Italian High Command is more obsessed with a battleship than even the Royal Navy have ever been obsessed with it. And they really have. They really are. One of the consistent things you see, though, is that the nationalists and the fascists and the various military high commands ally together in order to argue against the moderates. And again, one of the things I often think about when I'm looking at the rise of the fascist, of Mussolini especially, in Italy, is it is more to do with holding off not even socialists or communists, but moderates who might dare to cut the funding of the armed forces, who might dare to question the renowned wisdom of the admirals and generals from World War One. It gets quite disturbing when you start sort of looking at some of these particular generals and go, what did you do to deserve being called that? Um, there's Prince Luigi Amedeo, the Duke of Abruzzi, who has, of course, a ship named after him. And yeah, his service in World War One, he was the commander in chief of the Italian fleet. He was responsible for saving the army of the Kingdom of Serbia. And in February 1917 was replaced by Paolo Fionderville under pressure of the British and French allies because he was so useless. However, he assisted the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini with the Italia-Ethiopian Treaty of 1928. He was the one who took a Fiat 3000 tank to Addis Ababa and had fun there. It's just you can go through the various officers who get ships named for them, and honestly, you sit there and go, why? 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 Um, Luigi, basically the Cadona class, and we'll be getting into this, are entirely about how do I put this? Um, about changing the legacy and renewing the sort of the honor and status of officers who had pretty much been proven to be absolutely useless at their jobs. And you go through a list of the officers and they're named of the Adosta class, Eugenio Di Salvo, Cadona, Diaz. The fact is, there is one ship which is named for a modern general who actually is probably worthy of it. And that's Giuseppe Garibaldi, who is probably the one who would have most hated to have a ship named after him, especially by the person who named the ship after him. In fact, if honestly, I think if any of those generals could have come back from beyond the grave and reformed Italy, Garibaldi is probably the only one who could have, who, if he would have come back, would have actually been able to do it. And A and B would. I do not want to think what he would have done if he'd found Mussolini, but I do not think it would have been good for Mussolini. I really don't. I don't know. So, the Italians are limited in battleships, so now they have to build cruisers. They don't build a carrier, they build cruisers. Now, cruisers are their status unit, thanks to the treaties. And as we can tell, that's going to become an issue. Because I haven't even got into their doctrine or thought process yet, I'm just starting in on their foreign policy. Because all this has to be a factor of it. Take care, Brian from 109. John, would Italy have been better with tone-style cruisers to what they had? Nope. Italy builds a very good class of cruisers. They have an issue with what they build, and the trouble is, what they can build is limited by something which is fairly critical. And my comment goes, Italian carrier, funny, Francisco Carragher, funny since they won over the KUK Kriegsmarine in great part with air power. Yep. Cox. Infrastructure is so unsexy. I argued that the lack of large-scale dry docks for the Axis member nations were a factor in World War II. Oh, yes, they were. Tremendously. How quickly would a captured iron Polar be taken into iron service, be sunk by the Italians? Well, the Italians might target it, but there's also would the iron take it into service, and where would they take it into service? Because honestly, if they're going to send it anywhere, they're probably going to have to send it to India to be upgraded and fitted with British systems. In which case, it probably joins the Far Eastern Fleet. In which case, it might be sunk by the Japanese, or might not. Gogolan, don't count it, Doc. The army hated Garibaldi. They still do. And that's what he would have done to them. Fight them on the field and beat them. Yes! I have no problem with the Garibaldi doing this. I also think most of the soldiers would side with Garibaldi over the army. So, these are the various factors of Italian planning. In 1936, this is what they were thinking. These were their client, sort of the Italian Empire, divided up into client states, sovereign areas, areas which they had de facto control over. You notice one of those states, which is basically one of their under controls, is Austria, and there's almost a war between Italy and Germany over Austria, because when the Germans move into Austria, the Italians are on the border, and when they first threaten, and the Italian army on the border, basically the Germans decide to withdraw, and it's only once Hitler's got permission from Mussolini does he invade Austria, which is probably silly for Mussolini, because if he's that strong versus Germany and Austria, it might have been more sensible for him to try and take Austria himself. Would have certainly been interesting in Italy gaining that much firepower and that much industrial might. They managed to get that in Romania, then they could have had a really interesting war where Italy would have been the powerful Axis member, really. They'd had all the fuel. They'd have had a lot of the industry. They'd have probably got the Skoda works working properly for them. It's an interesting one to go down. Versus the real Italian Empire. There are lots of issues with Italian foreign policy and the Mediterranean. But their big issue is this. They have great plans. They are very invested in their ideas for their greatness, for the power, for the prestige. But the reality is the Italian military is always fundamentally weak, because they'll spend everything on a new cruiser or a battleship with sexy guns and all the stuff it needs, all the armor, but they don't invest in the infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I'm not just talking about things like dry docks. I'm talking about the fact that until you get to the Vittorio Veneto, the Littorio class actually, every major ship built for the Italian Navy has British turbines in it and British boilers. In fact, if anyone wants to look up the Littorio class, they're more than welcome to, and they might be interested about where their boilers actually come from. So there's your real limit on the Italians in terms of what ships they're building. Because the British always know exactly what power they've got. And therefore, if they judge their speed, they know their power, they know their speed, they'll know their rough length and their rough beam. They'll be able to work out their displacement quite well. This is another reason why I turn around and say to people, oh yeah, the British knew exactly how heavy the Zara class were. And they didn't care. Why did the British know that? Because they supplied them with the engines. You can't, in a nice way, you can pull the wool over many people's eyes when you're designing ships, as long as you supply the engines. Because they don't know how much horsepower those engines supply. So if you want to make your ship appear lighter than it is, you tell people that your engines are less powerful than they are. If you want it to appear heavier than it is, you tell them it's more powerful. There are ways of mucking around when you control your engine construction. When you don't, you can't do that. Now, did the Italians try to have technology transfer along the lines of the Japanese did to Congos? They did try all sorts of things, but honestly, they didn't have the ability to do much of that. Eventually, the Bellozono, I think it's Bellozono type turbines, the Italian ones, do get fitted into their battleships. But then most of the issues those ships have in World War II come down to those turbines. So, hands up who wants to give the free Polish Navy to Polar. That could be fun. But again, the fascist state is, in the sort of terms of Italy, is actually quite an important part of this whole thing, because when you allow and bring them in to use them as a cloak to protect your industrial military aristocracy, you then have to adopt some of their actions and some of their desires. And the thing about the Italian, about this map that's problematic and that map that's problematic, is it leaves out Mussolini's favourite claim: Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum, the Mediterranean, our sea. Mare Nostrum, Mare Nostrum. Every chance he flipping gets. And it's quite humorous because there is the Royal Navy Mediterranean Fleet sitting in the Mediterranean, which at quite a lot of the time is actually bigger than the Italian Navy. There is the French Navy sitting there, who are equal in size to the Italian Navy. And there are other powers in there who, whilst they don't have the firepower of the Italian Navy, certainly have enough that the Italian Navy is not going to walk them over that quickly. Especially when you consider the reality of the Italian ships. Italian ships are glass jaws. Hello. Before anyone thinks I'm being weird, I know I keep saying I'm going to be putting in bookshelves down below this desk. And that is certainly the plan. However, there is someone, if I just move this camera a tad, who disagrees with this as an idea. He feels that this is his space. So, you know, constant debate, that one. I may win it, I may not. But don't come out this way because there are cables literally sitting across in front of you and you'll drag everything onto the floor. Wilcox, you're an academic. Weirdest is obligatory. Yes. So, we get to the foreign defence policy. The foreign defence policy of Italy, Mussolini, and the Partito Nazionale Fascista. What have you knocked on the floor? Oh, you knocked it on the floor. That's okay. It's made of steel. It won't be problematic. You're now running off. You scared yourself. It was a tape measure. It's fine. You haven't damaged anything. The Poodle Palace. Yes, yes. He actually likes the painted walls. Anyway, so Italy. Italy has been a place for a longer time than it's been a country. That is the first thing you have to remember about Italy. Italy has been at the center of world events for a very, very long time. It had its unification in 1861, actually the 17th of March, 1861. which is always an interesting day to pick because, as you all probably know, the Ides of March are usually on the 15th of March. And so, yeah, 2 days after the Ides of March. So, what I'm saying is that in 1922, beginning of Mussolini's era, you're talking about a state which is 61 years old as a state. But Italy has been a people, has been going a long time. So, in a way, you have a cultural mindset of a great power, of a consistent power, of a founding a space of culture, of art, of learning. And yet, alongside that mentality of almost primus places, primary, being this powerful acknowledged state, is the other knowledge that we're only rather a young country. And we've been kicked around a lot. We're used to being ruled by other people for many, many hundreds of years. So you have a constant, almost warring between the view that they're all powerful and the view they need to assert their power to show they're powerful. So one of the things I often try and explain to students, the really powerful person in the room rarely needs to tell you they're powerful. And if they do, they only need to tell you because you have no framework to understand how powerful they are, and they want to make sure you don't get yourself into trouble inadvertently. And to this scenario for Italy is added the overarching politics of an ego and a political party. The ego of Mussolini, which is obscene. He had come from the Italian Socialist Party, the Fascist of Revolutionary Action, the Italian Fasces of Combat, the Republican Fascist Party is what he'd later be on, and of course the National Fascist Party, or the Partito Nazionale Fascista, of 1921 to 1943. He likes to go around a fair number of political parties he's built up over time. His worldview is very, very short term in many respects. How do I put it politely? Okay, in every country around this world, especially democracies, you will all know there is a certain type of politician who will jump on any bandwagon, any issue, loudly proclaiming they are it, they know it, they lead at it. No, he's not a smoodle. They will jump around and jump up, and then the moment another one comes in, they jump on that, and another one comes in, and they jump on that, and they jump on that. They don't ever lead issues; they jump on whatever issue is going to try and look like they're in the lead. They're the person who sees a crowd of people walking in a direction and will run in front, pick up a megaphone and a flag and shout, "Follow me!" And all the people go, "Who is that? Who are they? We're just going this way for pizza." That is what you're dealing with in terms of Mussolini. And then you've got the Fascist Party, which is in many ways... Okay, the Fascist Party is one of the most polycratic... polycratic. Yeah, polycratic. Polycratic infighting organizations ever seen. In fact, this is a trait which is shared by all fascist parties as a whole. The moment they actually get anywhere near power, they spend the rest of the time fighting out who actually has the power. And they spend a lot of time fighting each other. And as such, the actual foreign policy that comes out of the fascist party often depends on who is the most powerful person in the room talking to Mussolini at that particular time. Which can mean that the foreign policy can change in a heartbeat and can really confuse himself, let alone his own generals and admirals who are in no way connected with it. Hello, Albazaski. The fluffy researchers in the middle of gathering materials for the dog boats. Don't joke about that. Do not joke. Turning like the CEO of my company. Everyone knows he's powerful, so always teabag him in Cisco. I think, frankly, Italy getting Impero, Francisco Caracola, and Manu Solvera as carriers would be a major problem they are in, especially as Taranto, as their carrier aircraft would disrupt the raid. I would point out two things. One, they had the tonnage for two carriers, and especially if they're building them on a Francisco Caracola hull, it's going to be roughly 30,000 tons, so it'll be two carriers. Two, if the carrier isn't moving, the aircraft won't be launching, and of course also aircraft are very rarely stored on a carrier in when they're in port. They're usually flown out, and also that you're presuming they'd have night flying capability, which they might not fund at that. Three, if the Italians have a pair of carriers, then you can guarantee two things. One of them is the Royal Navy would have demanded more carrier allowance. Because one of the factors that goes into the carrier allowance they're prepared to accept in the London treaties, etc., is the fact that Italy hasn't built any. And it's one of the factors which goes into the decision making process of the procurement of carriers in the 1930s. The fact that neither Germany nor Italy has an aircraft carrier. It's what goes into their thought process. Japan has them, but Germany and Italy don't. If Germany and Italy, or if either of them has one, or both of them have one, and let's be honest, if Mussonlini, if this gentleman, if Fat Boy Fun Boy here has one, then, well, if he has one, then Hitler will insist on having one because it's keeping up with the Joneses, or rather the Eenies. So they would both have them. In which case, the Royal Navy would probably have got more because, let's be honest, the other person who's very competitive on these things is Churchill, and he would have been shouting and screaming for more carriers. So yeah, they would all have consequences. None of these things would happen in isolation. This is the point I always try and make about these things, and one of the reasons why it's very difficult and why I'm always very careful when I do alternate history sort of work, to point out that you have to keep the changes quite small, and you have to keep them within a certain time limit and certain frames of reference. Otherwise, you are completely off to the races for something which is randomly not going to happen. Gox, Italy had the biggest submarine fleet in 1940, didn't she? Nope. She had a bigger fleet than Germany did in 1940, but not not biggest. Right then, the Trento class. Well, this is an answer to your problem again. I would like to point out that the Trento class, when they're built, And they are built, let's be fair, between 1925 and 1929. Trento is laid down 1925, launched 1927, completed 1929. Trieste is laid down in 1925, June 1925 rather than February, launched in October 1926, and completed in December 1928. So it technically probably should be called the Trieste class, because let's be honest, Trieste is actually in service first. She launches a year earlier. She completes a year, months earlier. She should be there first. But Trento was laid down first, so Trento is the one it's named for. Trieste is, of course, torpedoed by HMS Utmost, and Trento is sunk by HMS Umbra. It's those U-class submarines of the Royal Navy. Everyone thinks U-boats and they think of the Germans, but no, it was the U-boats of the Royal Navy which were really lethal if you were the Italians. But no, Trieste and Trento. And they are built to be present ships. Often they're conceived as being discussed as being counters to the Duquesne class, but you have to remember there are 4 members in the Duquesne class. There are only 2 in these. They are certainly built to be fast, with a top speed in trials of 35.65 knots, but a service speed of 31 knots. Now, their peacetime crew was 723, their wartime crew 781. With 4 twin 8-inch 50 caliber guns. They came along with a 70mm belt, deck armor ranging from 20 to 50mm, turrets with 100mm of armor, and a conning tower of 100mm of armor. So, in simple terms, you do not want to be getting these ships anywhere near range of your opponent. Also, here's the thing, for ships which are armored in terms of long-range fighting, the turrets, despite our range and super firing pairs, sensible, allow for an elevation of 45 degrees, which gives you a maximum range of 27,000 meters. Great. Theoretical rate of fire of 3 rounds per minute, although the guns had to reset to the 15 degrees or lower to reload. However, they very quickly find out that the guns have excessive shell dispersion, and this is due to poor quality control in Italian munition factories. And here's the amazing thing, that feared dictator, Fat Boy Fun Boy, aka Mussonlini, doesn't do anything about it. By this point, he has made himself both the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of the Navy and Secretary of the Air Force. And the reason he's combined all 3 is because he wanted to combine the posts because it made sense. And it technically makes him the mouthpiece of all 3 services and does technically combine the services, so they should work together. But the reality is there's no professional head who equals the Chief of Staff to command them all, and so they don't do that. Now, here is the traditional thing that you need to understand about this ship. They are powered by 4 Parsons steam turbines and 12 oil-fired Yarrow boilers. Get used to hearing that, because here is the thing. Infrastructure is what happens to other people when you're a fascist dictatorship, and most importantly, actually working out what your industry needs to build is a completely different matter as well. Cox, I'm interested in longitudinal arrestor wire as design. Well, just remember, as they weren't longitudinal lengthwise, they weren't designed to stop aircraft. They were designed to stop aircraft tipping over the side when they landed. So longitudinal wires, arrestor wires, are not designed for the same reasons as latitudinal ones or cross stack ones. See, does I see you add the tater to be nice. I am very nice. I do add the tater to be nice. So, given the Poles HMS Barham and it will be repaired in record time and will reach 28 knots. How? Polish marine repairment. We added turbo and methanol injection. They added all sorts of things. Thanks. Hello. Regarding British U-boats, Bolzano was torpedoed by HMS Unbroken. Thus, yeah, it is the U-class boats of the Royal Navy are pretty darn scary when it comes to sinking Italian cruisers. The Trento class are large, high-status units. They displace at full load 13,500 tons. At practical load, they are supposed to be roughly 10,000 tons. And theoretically, it's 10,160 tons versus 10,000 long tons. They are treaty compliant ships. And the other thing you have to remember is they're designed by General Filippo Bonfietti. Always nice to have a specialist engineer design your ships. They have a narrow beam, they have barely any armor, and honestly, I do sometimes wonder if their protection would have any 8-inch shell which hit them would probably pass through them. But their range of 4,160 nautical miles at 16 knots does fit with the Mediterranean, with the class's duties, and 16 knots is a respectable cruising speed. They probably wouldn't be actually cruising around at 16 knots because actually having to do 4,160 nautical miles in the Mediterranean would be kind of interesting. But, you know, that's a good range to have, and they're a good pair of ships. There was also a small problem with the guns that's worth remembering, is that they carried the guns in a single cradle rather than independent mounts. This does affect some of the capabilities of a gun. There are fors and against in both. Usually, a single cradle will be lighter. Again, helps you reach the treaty limit. And the fact is, these ships are designed within the treaty limits. But independent cradling does, well, if they're independently mounted rather than cradled, it does enable them to, how do I put this? If the cradle goes wrong, you lose both guns. If one of the independent mounts gets shook and the other one is okay, you only lose one gun. That's a reality of survivability. I've got to get a system whereby yeah. This will sound very egotistical, but once I get this room fixed and organised, and I get actually paid the money I'm owed by universities, which is very self-indulgent, but let me just finish this. I'm going to look so forward to having my tower unit and both big screens. And I'll probably have the laptop for lives as well, because I'll then have the chat live on the laptop and I'll have the screens for the presentation. And it will make my life a lot easier. I'll also feel like some sort of weird supervillain. or maybe a good guy, but no. The good guys, they have people in the watchtower who sit and watch these things, but it's supervillains who usually sit behind lots of screens. How about a banker? Not much difference. Okay. Did they have torpedoes? They did. They carried 4 twin 21-inch torpedoes. Their anti-aircraft, well, the Trieste had theoretically 8 single 20mm and Trento 4. They had 4 twin 37mm, 4 single 40mm, and 8 twin 4-inch guns. So they were well armed for that. But let's be honest. Also, something you find out when you start to look into these ships is you go, right, where are the aircraft stored? And if I go back to that, I would just like to point this out before anyone sort of thinks I'm being a bit weird. Have a look at the aircraft arrangements. Now, if you look at the front of that plan, the design plan, you will notice an aircraft sitting there. Yes. There is an aircraft sitting there. The hangar is located under the forecastle, and a fixed catapult is mounted on the centerline at the bow. So, in other words, you see that thing which drops down in front of the forward gun turret, the A turret. That's an aircraft lift. I don't want to shock you all, but can we all agree that's not really the most sensible place in the world to stick an aircraft lift? Because, you've got your ammunition stored there, you've got your aviation fuel all stored at the front of the ship, which is probably going to be where the enemy's going to be aiming. You've also got the plane, and you've got a lift, which is letting us that, okay, yes, this ship doesn't have much in the way of armor, but whatever deck armor it does have, you think will be around the magazine area, and yet they have a lift there. And I know it theoretically means you can launch your aircraft directly into the wind far more easier, because you can turn your ship towards it and go at high speed, and then fire the catapult. But again, I cannot emphasize this more strongly. You have a lift, hangar, fuel, and weapons storage arrangements for your aircraft sitting in front of your forward main battery, and its ammunition storage, all its magazines, everything in the bow. In the bow. If Hood, Renown, Repulse are a magnitude larger in weight and county class is closer in type. Remember, Trento Trieste, Italian cruiser version of Hood, Renown, Repulse? Not really. No. No, I think even if you adjust those 3 down, you can't get anywhere near the Trento armor level. Oh, well, they cannot shoot the airplane off the ship with different methods then. Yeah. Main battery assisted takeoff plane. No thanks. Here is the really worrying thing, though, because if you look very carefully, you see that once the Trentos had this, they continue with this idea into the Contadori. Yes, they continue the idea with these vessels. The Gisiano class. Why? 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 Conditori? Why? Why? And these vessels, they're even more worrying because they have 20 millimeter of deck armor. They have a belt of 24 millimeters. That's 0.94 inches for those of you who like in Imperial. 23 millimeter turrets. So the turrets actually have thinner armor than the belt, and a 40 millimeter tower. Please note, this is probably only some mild advice, but 23 millimeters of armor is not going to stop a 6-inch shell at any range, really, that it actually hits you at. It's not going to stop a 4.7-inch shell at any range it's going to hit you at. In fact, honestly, I can say with quite a lot of confidence that you basically are armoring against splinter damage in terms of an engagement. And this is 6,500 tons in standard. Able 37 knots, so really fast. 3,800 nautical miles at 18 knots, really good. I'm liking it. They are sort of the Gisiano class. Really good ships, high speed, powerful. And yet they have such thin armor that I honestly wouldn't want to take them up against anything. And there are some who write, and I know I've said this myself, they sort of equate roughly in weight and firepower to the Leander class, right? Well, the Leander class have 1 inch in deck armor and 1 inch in gun turrets, which I consider laughable, but let's be honest, is about rough right compared to these ships. But they have 3-inch armor magazine around the armor magazine, around the magazine box. So they have 3 inches of armor there. Sometimes when I really want to compare them to things, I tend to pick on the Arethusa class, who have a 2.25-inch belt, 1-inch deck, turrets, and bulkheads, and between 1 and 3-inch magazine box protection. Yeah, they're only capable of 32.25 knots, or 5,300 nautical miles at 13 knots. But I'd still prefer to go to sea in one of them than I would one of these. Because you not only do not have that much armor, you also have, still in the most exposed place possibly imaginable, you have your aircraft. Which again is 2 planes stored in a hangar. 2 planes stored in a hangar. And 1 catapult firing forward. They have a lift. Mm-hmm. So no, the way of the lift wasn't probably armored properly. So when the lift is down, the weight of magazine is free. More than likely, flying off platforms. Richard, just as stupid as in that case, like the Italians. This is not a flying off platform. This is a catapult. The British have the flying off catapult platforms, and I do agree they are silly. But just because one side is stupid doesn't make the other side stupidity excusable. Thanks. Totally unrelated to the same cruiser bathhouse. Why was the HMS Renown fitted with so many 20mm Oricons instead of some more mid-sized 40mm pom-poms? Bothers aren't. Pretty much you're dealing with weight restrictions of the positions they were putting them in versus also supply and speed of being able to be fitted with what was available. I was asking, weren't the scout planes supposed to launch from a cruiser and then land on ground, i.e., on islands? I can't see a way of recovering. Um, the planes are seaplanes. They do have cranes, etc., and things to recover them. But I think they have to recover them, to disassemble them, and reassemble them in a hangar or something like that. There was very weird stuff. I think they did also have the option of returning to port, and I think that was more practical one they actually carried on with. I was reading something about them being theoretically possible for them to be picked up by the boat crane, and then they could be broken into components and taken to the carried along by the humans to the flight deck and to the hangar, and then reassembled in the hangar. And I was listening to reading that and just thinking, oh my lord, it's theoretically possible, not really sensible. John Sachs, with the issues they had of British subs, I'm surprised the Italians did not apply more effort to sweep the Med of subs. That would have required a lot more anti-submarine warfare escorts, and again, that would have required infrastructure being put into yards to build them. Damn, the USN decides to keep the USS Constitution in commission to take these out. But no. Yeah, the 25mm of armor, that's for the guns and turrets. That's sort of to an extent excusable. As said, the Leander class have equivalent, and some of the British cruisers, 6-inch cruisers, have equivalent. But turrets are quite small things. The entire belt, the magazine, those things need to be heavily armored, and these don't have that. Zacharian, I imagine if for some bizarre reason, if you're the early Italian battlecruiser that lasted to fighting Model 2, they have a field day of Italian cruisers. It'd be easy mode. Oh, good lord, no, no. This is the thing. For the Italians, their light cruisers, etc., there is a class which up there would have been hard for battlecruisers to take on, which we'll be getting to, but no, none of the light cruisers would be hard. I don't go the hardest against the Regia Marina. And nicest way, what I would always say about the Regia Marina is they are trying to build things which really they don't want. I would argue the Regia Marina was actually quite sensible with their two debates of arguments, because their thoughts were either you build destroyers and torpedo boats, or you build battleships. And that really fits the Italian Navy if you think about the Mediterranean, because in the Mediterranean, you either go looking for trouble because you will find it. With enough firepower and enough armor, you can deal with that trouble. Or you you are both expendable enough and have the speed enough that you might survive, be able to have firepower to deliver trouble, speed enough to get away, and expendable enough, it doesn't matter if you don't. So, for the Italians, the worst case scenario is to be trapped in a treaty where they're building cruisers. Because honestly, cruisers make the least sense for the Italian Navy. That's the honest thing. I would argue that the Gisiano class and the Contadori, and definitely the Capitani Romani class, are basically enlarged destroyers. I'd argue that's what they were thinking about them. And they make sense under those circumstances. You know, they carry 4 21-inch torpedo tubes. But the trouble is they have to carry 6-inch guns, and they have to be cruisers because they need to have cruisers, because everyone under a treaty is allowed to build up to 10,000-ton vessels, which are called cruisers. And so it's status. It's keeping up with the French and keeping up with everyone else. And again, you don't need that if you're the Italians, honestly. But they're building them. Cassiania class. Well, as I said, their decks 20mm, belt 24mm, turrets 23mm, tower 40mm is just. The Zara class. Now, I have great love for these. I'm going to start off by saying this. These are one of the closest classes commissioned built in the 1920s, which actually fit with being a heavy cruiser. Yes, they are 11,900 tons, or that's 11,712 long tons in standard. Yes, they are therefore seriously overweight. But if any cruiser built in that period really can claim to be a heavy cruiser, as in a balanced, large cruiser, it's probably these. They have. Excuse me a second. Sorry, Fluff. I know that disturbed you. You were getting your sleep. Good boy. They have 8 203mm. That's 8-inch, roughly. 53 caliber guns. Nice. They have 1600mm 47 caliber guns. 4 40mm guns when they're sort of starting out. 8 37mm 54 caliber anti-aircraft guns later on. Gorzia carried 14 20mm 65 anti-aircraft guns. All of them carried 8 13.2mm machine guns. Had 70mm of deck armor. Had 150, that's 2.8 inches of deck armor. Had a belt of 150mm, that's 5.9 inches. Turret faces were 150mm. Barbette was 150mm, and the conning tower was 150mm. Now, I would like to point out that once again, though, they do have some issues. One of those issues I'd point to is the bright sparks still put the frigating flight catapult and hangar forward. I mean, I don't know which bright spark had that particular obsession with sticking the hangar forward in these ships, but seriously, they need to be found and they need to be removed. But the Zara class are gorgeous. And actually, if you go to the Wikipedia page of them, if I'm from memory, let me just click through to it. Yeah. If you go to the Zara class cruiser page, you actually find a picture of Fiume launching a seaplane in 1935. That's got to be a view behind you that's going to make you go as fast as you can away from the takeoff. You're literally looking behind you and you've got 4 8-inch guns staring straight at you. They are very good ships. I'd also say they're possibly the best balanced of their design, but there's a problem for them. The Italians want a fast ship. These are not fast. Why are they not fast? Well, they're able to do 32 knots, so that's fast, but the Italians prefer 36 knots. These can do, they've got a fairly good range, fairly good operation. Why are they not faster? Well, it's quite simple. The Italians have a problem. These ships are powered by 2 steam turbines, which are supplied by 4. Each turbine is supplied by 4 boilers. Fiume gets her boilers from Yarrow. The rest of the class get their boilers from Thornycroft. They all get their steam turbines from Parsons. Now, let's put it this way. Let's say you wanted this ship to reach 36 knots. What could you do? What would be the easiest way to do that? Well, that'd be to fit 3 turbines and 12 boilers, wouldn't it? Yes, it would have to be a bigger ship overall, a bit bigger, but you could do it. But the trouble is, if you do that, the British are going to know. The British will know exactly what's going on. Because guess what? You get your engines, your turbines, your boilers from the British. The British will know roughly the length of the ship, they'll know roughly the beam. They'll be able to work out the coefficient of that hull. And they'll know how much horsepower you've got, how much shaft horsepower you've got from the engines and boilers they supplied you. So they know exactly the tonnage of this ship. In fact, I'm 100% certain the British knew pretty much all the details they needed to know about the Zara class. They didn't blow the whistle on it because why do so? They don't need to. It's no skin off their nose because how many other Italians going to have? 4? That's cute. So the Italians have 4 cruisers which could win in a one-on-one fight versus a British 8-inch cruiser. How about if they end up fighting, I don't know, Renown, Repulse, or Hood? Probably won't win that one. But they'll cause them trouble, but they won't win it. Or if they end up fighting a pair of British heavy cruisers, British 8-inch cruisers, or a pack of British light cruisers, or a pack of British destroyers. That's what the British will be thinking about. They won't worry that these ships are individually heavier. The French would have worried, but the British won't. But the fact is, the Italians could only order what they could order unless they wanted to look like be very obvious they were cheating. This is the trouble when you don't have the infrastructure to sustain yourself. You can't cheat if you have to buy from other people. Colin Cameron, well, seriously, though, would British AA gun, World War II AA guns not defeat dead armor? I'm presuming talking about the previous couple classes. Certainly the 40mm might have had a chance at close range. Googleana, doesn't the naval radar invalidate the whole Italian naval doctrine? It takes away basically all the ways for small ships to attack and deter battleships. Yes and no. Basically, naval radar does make rapid firing anti-cruiser, anti-destroyer guns far more viable, yes, but also makes them more accurate in their fire as well. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of it. It certainly makes it more difficult. Hi, Bear Smith. Was she launching the aircraft while in port, looking out to sea? I'd say that sea looks real calm. That's the Mediterranean. That's the Med. She's not actually in harbour at that point. That's the Med. How's that? So the Italians would have been better if they went off their own version of Dido Atlanta. Honestly, you see, the thing is, when I look at the Italian doctrine, and the Italian doctrine starts to have these cruisers being fast wings attached to their battle fleet, providing fire support and maneuvering with the battle, especially because they're a limited number of battleships. So that's where the 8-inch cruisers especially start to fit in. The Zara class are the ones which fit in with that best. But the Zara class need to be faster to do the role, and the trouble is they can't be, so they're not fast enough for the Italians. Especially for the Italian high command, because they're so worried about speed and needing speed to maneuver to be able to offset the numerical advantage that especially the Anglo-French alliance would have. Needing speed to be able to withdraw. So basically, these aren't fast enough, and they can't be fast enough because the Italians can build a ship with armor, but they can't build. They can't build all the armor. They can build everything else they want to build. They don't build the turbines and they don't build the boilers at this point. And it's the Zara class are my favourites as well of the Italian ships. In fact, they're my favourite of the Italian designs. But I do know what their problem is from the Italian perspective. They have 2 turbines, 2 propellers, and are only capable of doing 32 knots. Thanks, Caroline. To clarify the question, Doc, I was thinking of the RN with radar and the Italian Navy attacking the battleships. Yeah, that was part of it. It's fun. I imagine knowing the turbine and boiler sets is quite useful to the British planning. Helps Cunningham know when he can come out. It does have an impact, and also it has an impact on things like spare parts. Again, something you when Italy goes to war in World War II, where do their spare parts come from for these engines? They came from Britain. So you either have to try and produce your own spare parts, or you have to try and convert all these ships to different engines. Either way, you have to get a whole new supply line going. That's fun. And Cox, how much extra oil do those 10 extra knots cost? No, it's not 10 extra knots. It's 36 knots versus 32. So it'd be, 3 turbines, which would probably take you up to roughly 137,500 shaft horsepower. And this is what happens. Bolzano happens. Bolzano is a modified Trento class, honestly. And when I say modified, well, what does she have? She has the 8-inch 53 caliber guns. That's 2 or 3 53s. She has a sound displacement of 10,890 long tons, or 11,060 tons. She's laid down in 1930, launched in 1932. She's named for the city of Bolzano, which is the capital city of the province of Southern Tyrol. She is built in Genoa, mainly because the Reggio Marina was under intense pressure from Gio Ansondo for a construction contract. Basically, the industrial aristocracy are pressuring the naval aristocracy to build something. This ship had a 50mm deck armor, 70mm of belt. The turret faces were 100mm, and the barbettes 70mm. Speed of 36 knots. Again, 4 Parsons geared steam turbines and 4 screw propellers, with 10 water tube boilers, of course, 10 boilers, which, if I remember correctly, were they Thornycroft or were they the other? Ooh, trying to remember if they were Thornycroft or if they were Yarrow. I think they were Yarrow, but I could be wrong. It's from memory. So if I am, please correct me. But I thought they were Yarrow. That got 150,000 shaft horsepower. And that got her the 36 knots they really wanted. But she carried 3 seaplanes. Mm-hmm. And she carried them slightly differently to her counterparts. And this is one of the reasons why she's considered a modified design. Because if you look at Bolzano, you'll notice you can see a seaplane if you look along the superstructure. And yes, someone has thought, hang on, maybe it's pretty darn stupid where we've been putting them. Maybe we should put them elsewhere. It happens occasionally. Someone thinks. It's rare, but someone thinks. Now, as has already been mentioned, um, she didn't have the best luck with British submarines. In fact, she was technically torpedoed twice by them. Let's see. In my notes, which ones was it? It was used, wasn't it? Yes, it was used. No, she was torpedoed first by HMS Triumph, and then by Unbroken. Sorry, not sure why I'm sneezing this evening. I know, you worry about it. After she was torpedoed by Triumph, she was towed into Messina by a pair of tugs. But, you know, she doesn't get far when she eventually, in August of, I think almost the same, no, August of the next year, 1942, August 1942, she's doing an attack trying sailing with two of her sisters, Trieste and Gorzia, well, two other cruisers, um, to intercept a British convoy. They were ordered back after the Luftwaffe denied air support, and, well, on their way back, they came across a Royal Navy submarine, which went, hello. It's always nice when a Royal Navy submarine gets to go, hello. Especially unbroken. It's usually not a good hello for anyone. So the Italians got 7 heavy cruisers. The Trento pair, 4 Zaras, and Balzano. Technically, we'll call them 8-inch cruisers, not heavy cruisers, because let's be honest, 4 I would classify as heavy cruisers, the Zaras, and 3 I would classify as 8-inch cruisers. Nice to hear everyone. I they deal the cruiser fleet of the Italians the same way they always deal with the Italians. Would I be correct in guessing that if going from 8 boiler 2 turbine to 12 boiler 3 turbines will burn 150% the fuel of the original for those extra 4 knots? Probably. Yeah, probably. But let's be honest, if you're operating Mediterranean, you're not going for that far away. Plus, you'd have more space for more fuel as well. Because when you're building them, you would actually be able to build in space, etc. Yolanda, just wondering, would England, France, Czechoslovakia sell steel to Italy as easily without the treaty? Wouldn't they be worried about what the Royal Marina would have used it for and cut the trade? Probably not. I'm pretty sure happy to sell it to them because it means they know what they're doing. Same with everyone else. MJ Whitley says Bolzano had Parsons turbines and Yarra and Sando boilers. Thank you. I thought they were Yarrows. And Saldo is their Italian, the Italian producer of them, I think, at one point. So probably they're the domestically made ones. Forgotten about the Etna class light cruisers. Well, they have the German vessels, which are Taranto, Bari, Brindi, Venzina, and Asonia, which are all stricken by 1937, other than Taranto and Bari, which are Strasbourg and Pilar, which were scuttled 1943 and, well, 1943. The Etna class were not completed. They are scuttled in 1943, reflated and sawed off. So no, yeah, and the Capitani Romana class, well, they managed to get 6 of those into service at some points. Certain points. Really, they don't have a good time with cruisers. So, the Cadona class. Now, this is where you get some of the really interesting politics starting to enter it. Because, let's be honest, the Condottieri, the first ships, the Ghesana class, are built to relive past Italian honours, especially those which involve them driving, mainly English generals, it seems, from Italy. Okay, you're naming your ships for generals, but we'll leave that one side. Cadano class are about the rehabilitation of 2 particular generals. Oh, my windows get even more interesting once you realise they have various other things which are being painted as we speak. In fact, at the end I'll do that. Yeah, the Cadona class are... how do I put this politely? They are the most political class of any built. They are basically to rehabilitate and part of the rehabilitation program of 2 generals who in World War one of them had been absolutely disastrous. The second one had been fairly successful, but still lost a lot of people. And basically, this is part of Mussolini's deal. He will rehabilitate the army's generals. He will make them into heroes again. He'll make them marshals of Italy. In return, the army will let him get away with some things and let him basically call himself Il Duce. Just as long as he doesn't threaten the king. Okay? He's got to remember, he's not head of state. He's head of government, not head of state. And they are built for that. They are built with the intention in mind of giving greatness to these guys. And they're frigging terrible. And I mean that in the nicest way, but I try to be nice. I try, but you know, these ones, they just get worse as they go on. I have the Abruzzi class. I have a lot of affection for, but the Abruzzi class shouldn't really be included in the Condottieri in my mind. But these ones, they have 20mm deck armor, 24mm belt armor, 23mm turrets. Again, all that stuff, lovely. But They have 2 shafts, 6 Yarra boilers, they're 37 knots speed, and they are 5,323 tons standard. 7,113 tons fully loaded. So there's 1,800 tons roughly difference between their standard and their full load. They can do 2,930 nautical miles at 16 knots. And with only 2 turbines and 6 boilers to get them to 5,000 horsepower and doing 37 knots, seriously, those engines must need a lot of maintenance. They carry 4 21-inch torpedo tubes. 4 tubes. 8 machine guns in 4 twin mounts. 2 37mm in single mounts. 6 4-inch guns in 3 twin mounts. 8 6-inch guns in 4 twin mounts. It's just... yeah. And this is, of course, the sister. This is Amanda Diaz. This isn't Luigi Candona, because Luigi Candona is, well, an interesting vessel. Again, though, the one advantage you have to say of these ships is that they do move the seaplanes back. That's always an improvement, but it takes them time to realize that it's a good idea to do that. They are 169.3 meters long. They have 15.5 meters of beam, and they have 5.2 meters of draft. They are light. They are thin. If you hit them with a 4.5-inch shell, you could well pass through them and come out the other side, which could be part of their survivability. Go Lander. 11 useless bloody battles on the Azo, demoralizing, debilitating the army to almost losing the war. Let's say his name carried some baggage, so to speak. Yes! Baggage is a nice way of putting it, what he carried. Condona must invest in a Ferrari go faster paint job, and the ship does survive, but probably because he doesn't charge it. I agreed. William, I'd agree with that, Gogolander. William Cox, aircraft servicing, arming, and repair should be behind the main armor for a reason. That requires a certain level of armoring to make it worthwhile. Age of Vernon, I think I'd rather take a tribal to battle than a Condona, all things considered. Well, you have the same really offensive power, let's be honest, and you have a far smaller target. It gets worse as it goes on. And when I say worse, I mean it does get worse. The next class after this are... well, the point is, when you're building a class after class, you expect them to iterate and improve. You don't expect them to actually get worse. And they do get worse. You're going to keep doing that. Sorry. Just saving something. The classes, they just keep getting worse. They stay the same while everyone else is improving. So relatively to other powers, they are getting worse. They are now less capable than they were. if you're less capable in comparison, because at the time they were built, their speed was armor. But as the time you get further on to 1930s, and then even worse, when you get well into the 1930s, you're building the same ship and expecting the same results when you know the world has changed. You do realise I had to go away from here, put up the windows, because you kept knocking them down and kept trying to break them, and that was the only safe place I could put them. And now you want a biscuit from me. Oh, to live the life of a fluffy pup. And in answer to one of the questions from Patron, how many biscuits does Papa give his does it give dogs? A lot. I am shameless. I bribed them. Right. Seneca, why are so many nations just terrible at cruisers? Germany, Italy, Japan, Spain. I think in many respects it's because once you put on the limitations you do in terms of cruiser construction because of the treaties, you make it very difficult to tailor a cruiser to your needs. What does Italy really need? Well, Italy, as I've said before, needs either ships which are battleships or battleship equivalent of their types, armored, fast, well, fast battleship equivalent size, but able to deliver and take a punch. Or they need very fast, very expendable ships. They can't afford the in-between ships. Suddenly they've got to build a load of in-between ships. And I would argue this is making a cruiser as expendable as it can be, but it's still got 500 odd crew, which means it's not expendable. And it's named for Raimondo Montecurli, which makes it even less expendable. And Idfa, are two trebles enough for one Cadona? There is a battle called the Battle of Cape Bon, where there are 3 Royal Navy destroyers, 2 of them tribal class. I think the other one's a J class, and a Dutch destroyer involved. And from memory. And basically, before the J class and the Dutch destroyer really get to do much fighting at all, the 2 tribals have sunk both conditori through a combination of torpedoes and gunfire. And yes, it is an ambush. And when I say ambush, I mean they've used radar. The ships are carrying fuel on their decks because they were trying to make a run to Libya. They've turned around, and the British destroyers are attacking from the shore side, from the Italian coast. Theoretically, their safe spot. They were attacking from their safe side. They managed to get round and attack from there. But it does take out 2 ships. So, yeah, there are times you lose your tribal class destroyer, but there are also times when, frankly, it's a 1v1 and the tribal wins. Or 2v2 and the tribal wins. Some of the Cadonas, the Italian 52-53 gun was able to fire twice fast thanks to modified loading sequence. I would agree. The 6-inch gun for the Italian cruisers was, theoretically, on paper, an excellent and very fast loading thing. They also suffered from issues with infrastructure there in terms of keeping that going and making sure that had the spare parts and specifically the greases it needed to make sure it could keep going and could fire at that rate. Because theoretically, they have a phenomenal first burst of 3 rounds, which allows them to do a really good thing. The same with the 8-inch guns. And yeah. And then you couple that with very, very bad quality control in terms of their arms manufacture, which could well be nicest way down to various people cutting corners. I know there's some people talk about mafia involvement here, but I think that could be overblown. They're just those things coupled together. A very, very high tech, very sensitive, high speed, high firing rate gun combined with that requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of stuff to keep it going, combined with variable control, quality control on the 6-inch gun ammunition, and you end up with having a wide dispersal of fire, so they can fire very quickly, but they can't always hit their targets. I wish to know more about the fire rate and the system of these Italian guns. Burst fire. Well, actually, do I have my notes on that? Because I do have it somewhere. um, gun mounts had electrical power training. It was designed by Mare, especially in the model 1929. And in fact, they also would. The model 1926 of the 6-inch gun is designed by Ansaldo, and they have these two 6-inch guns which are similar, but the components were not interchangeable, really. They said there's this line there, not fully interchangeable. They're not interchangeable really in any way, shape, or form without a lot of work. Gun mounts had electrically powered training, elevation hoist, rammers, and shared a common cradle. Everything was meant to make them as fast as possible. The model 1929, thanks to ammunition handling rate, meant that it fired nearly twice as fast as 1926. The 1926 could be loaded at plus 20 degrees. The 1929 could be loaded at any angle up to 45 degrees. Both guns had an original muzzle velocity of 1,000 meters per second. It was reduced to 850 meters per second with armor-piercing shells. And they did. This was due to the dispersal problems of their dispersion problems of their fire. And shell weight was also reduced from 50 kilograms to 47.5 kilograms in an attempt to resolve these problems. It didn't really succeed. The guns are located together in a common cradle, and this is where the big problems come in. The common cradle allows you to do a lot of things efficiently at low weight, but it does also complicate the loading of the guns. It does make things very close together. Hmm. But pretty much it's the way the ammunition is stacked through the system that affects the rate of fire and allows them to very much simplify it. I would also say, though, that there are some of the ammunition practices I would say BT, etc., and his battlecruiser force would be proud of. Bum bum. Hi, Carl Harmon. 090. On paper, Monteculi looks similar to the Leander. Similar in armament, protection, and speed. Oh, it's the lovely, you'll be glad to know, the wonderful people at YouTube are currently saying now would be a good time to insert ads. I'm about 2.25 hours in, and they now want me to insert an ad? Seems a bit strange. Yeah. I don't know. As said though earlier, the patron vote is now live with the selections up, so please go have a look at those. I didn't put a link down below, I probably should have done, but there's a link to Patreon down below, which will take you to it. And yeah, thank you for all your support, because seriously, all this, I might be up to the moment currently up till about 2, 3 a.m. and then up again at 7:30 for 8 a.m. in the morning to get on with the day, to manage to keep my workload going up and to get all the painting and everything done. But it seriously wouldn't have been possible without all of you and your support. It wouldn't be possible to have done all this without you. And it wouldn't be possible to be sitting in this office working away without all of you, because honestly, turns out universities are not that reliable when it comes to remembering to pay you the full amount they owe you. Again, how shocking. I do like working for them, but they're not that great for contract staff. Some of the universities, especially ones that rely on contract staff, are very, very forgetful. And Cox, 2-screw heavy cruisers. Would 4 be more useful? 4 screws would be always more useful. But 3 would do. And then there's the Duca d'Aosta class. Oh. So what fate befell this cruiser? Oh, there are so many fates that befell the cruisers. But let's be honest. The Monteculi is named for an Italian-born professional soldier who served the Habsburg monarchy and developed the 1648 linear infantry tactics. Yes, he was the equal. He was considered an equal of the French General Turenne. Um, you know, the other one is named for Muzio Antonio Sforza, which he was the founder of Sforza dynasty. I keep mispronouncing that. I do know. And led the Bolognese Florentine army at the Battle of Casalecchio, and was the father of Francisco, who ruled Milan for 16 years. So that's who they named those for. And then you have the DaCosta class. And frankly, yeah. Fun ships. Fun ships. Both Cardona and Diaz. Well, Cardona survived to 1951. Diaz was lost in 1941 to a submarine. Monteculi survived to 1964. Museo Atondolio, it was named for Sforza, was sunk in 1942. And, well, both of this class, the Aosta class, lived through the war. And mainly, I think those ships that lived through the war lived through them because they're honestly so bad they don't want to take them to sea. Now, these ships, let's see. Well, the Aosta is, of course, known as Prince Emanuele Filiberto Vittorio Eugenio Alberto Genoa Giuseppe Maria de Saviora, the second Duke of Aosta, who is known as the Undefeated Duke. He commanded the Italian Third Army during World War One and became a Marshal of Italy. Now, you've already heard a lot of various things about his actual reality war experience and war service, and how so many of the whatever reasons he managed to stay undefeated was other people died for him, so he didn't get defeated. He was buried in the military ceremony of Repudulia in 1931 when he died. He had a cruiser named after him, of course, the Oslo, which is actually given to the Soviet Union after World War II. Lucky Soviet Union. They had again, I do sometimes wonder if the vessels they were given this went, yes, we want this cruiser. You get them, the British go, yeah, have it. Have a the Oster class. And they're going, Why are you so happy to give it us? Have it. Have it. Isn't it lovely? It has 35 millimeters of deck armor. It has a 70 millimeter belt. Turrets have 90 millimeters of armor. Conning tower has 100 millimeters. These are all good things. This is an improvement on the predecessors by a long way. They have 8 6-inch 1929 Otto model guns. They have 600 millimeter guns. Again, Otto. In fact, Otto are critical in producing their guns at the moment. At this point, they have 4 twin 37 millimeters. They have 12, well, in 6 twin actually, 13.2 millimeter machine guns, and has 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tube launchers. That's great. She unsuccessfully took part in a bombardment of Allied positions around Palermo in 1943. She is considered a lucky ship because she was never damaged in any naval actions in which she participated, nor she was ever damaged by air attack or submarine attack. I have no doubt that this might have been helped by the fact that she spent, let's see, 1940, she does take part in the Battle of Punta Stillo. Okay. She had circumnavigated with her sister, did a circumnavigation of the world. Well, attempted it. They instead decided to visit just the Caribbean and South America and return to La Spezia in March 1939. They very nearly got caught the other side of the world before World War II, when World War II began. If they'd gone on their full world tour like some of the other ships in there, as the Condottieri had, they could well have been caught out, and then, well, they'd have had to have been interred somewhere, or the British would have had them, because the British would have loved that. I don't know. These ships are just, yeah. I'm just discussing these ships and thinking that in 1933, this is what you're building. And it's a case of, it has armor, yes. Mm-hmm. What are the choices? Unreliable remaining to pay, quite illegal. Does your government not come down hard upon things like this? No, I'm not getting into the topic on this too much, but yeah, they have issues sometimes. If anyone chats with Dan Freeman, I'm fairly sure he has heard the full story, but he won't put it in the chat. But if you ask him on Discord, he might well explain it. I think he's had to sit through a video of me chatting about it. The self-called unbeaten, yeah. Take care, Jennifer. Yeah, thank you, Gogo Lander. It's been really nice having you here. Carmen, why did they survive 1950-60 given that they went to the Soviet Union? The Italians got to keep some ships, but you have to remember the Italians switched sides in 1943. So that is what sort of helped. Because the Italians, therefore, weren't all bad. By the time the war was over, they'd switched sides. So remember, they were on the Allies' side by the end of the war. My god, damn, the number is down at Battleship Armor. It is, but that's worrying that it's Battleship Armor compared to the previous ones. So what are you saying about specific grease for the automatic guns? Let's put it this way. They needed a lot of advanced... What's this? I think it hasn't... I've been reading some Italian technical manuals, and they had actually specific names. And there were some very, very specific grease types being used to keep these guns working at the conditions they wanted to work them in. And one of them was actually imported from... Oh, where was it imported from? Usually imported from Sweden. And you would think, okay, that's not going to be that difficult. I mean, the Germans controlled the Baltic, then it has to go... Oh, the trouble is the Germans also needed it. So the supplies would disappear. Hello, oh, hello. Concentrate. Hello. So, somehow giving the armor in millimeters sounds less than inches. To be fair, it's how the Italians fought. She's too pretty to shoot at. No. And the Savonia was given the Greece of reparations. Carmen, yeah, heritage and Achaemenid do seem to forget money is a kind of essential. I've had payday to miss several times. It's an interesting factor in life. Now you have me wondering why sort of grease is it? I think it was breech grease. I think it was the grease used for the breech mechanisms, which of course has to deal with operating from cold and then going very, very hot, and it has to operate in both scenarios. But I'm trying to remember because I spent. This is the trouble actually. I have to say with pulling the hours I'm currently pulling. Information takes longer to stay in its place. Right then. And now these ships, if you thought the previous ones were positively starting to sound almost battleship it, these are going to sound absolutely amazing. Because now I would like to point out that this particular one of them is named for Giuseppe Garibaldi in this class, who does deserve a cruiser name for him. The other one is named for the Duke de Bruzzi, who no, and no. But anyway, this class, their outer belt is 30 millimeters. Their inner belt is 100 millimeters. So their outer belt is 1.2 inches. Their inner belt is 3.9 inches. Their main deck is 40 millimeters, but they have an upper deck which has 10 to 15 millimeters, i.e., 1.6 inches on the main deck, 0.39 to 0.59 inches on the upper deck. Turrets, 5.3 inches or 135 millimeters thick armor. Barbettes between 30 and 100 millimeters, that's 1.2 to 3.9 inches. Outer bulkheads, 30 millimeter, that's 1.2 inches. Inner bulkheads, 100 millimeters, 3.9 inches. Conning tower, 30 to 140 millimeters, that's on 1.2 to 5.5 inches. This thing is a freaking battleship compared to the others. 10 152 millimeter guns. 152, 55 guns. Now, this is their sort of last batch of 6-inch guns, really, and these are models 1934 and 36 were these 6-inch guns. They are built by Ansaldo and Otto Malera, again. The Ansaldo model 1934 versions are mounted in triple wing turrets on the Littorio. and in triple and twin super firing turrets forward and aft on the Duca Delegate Abruzzi class. The Otto versions of the guns were mounted in the wing turrets in the Vittorio Veneto and the Roma. Again, there is a difference between the gun types. So yes, they have produced two different classes of the same gun to keep two different production lines going. Hello, what are we complaining about now? Not had a biscuit in like 20 minutes, or 2 minutes, or 2 seconds. Are you looking for Foxy? I don't think she's coming to visit tonight. Mainly because you're wandering around. If you weren't wandering around, she'd be out here to say hello. She'd probably be hopping through that window knowing her. She'd be amazed that there's a step ladder there. That would be definitely something she'd be climbing. Have you got through all the biscuits in this bag? Have you? No. Your papa might have some more biscuits. He might buy them by the huge box load. I like this class. I do. They're 11,350 tons in standard. They have a range of 4,125 nautical miles at 13 knots. So they are pretty much absurdly short-legged. But again, it's fine for Mediterranean. They have 6 boilers, 2 shafts, and a top speed of 34 knots. Their length is roughly 187 meters long. Their beam's 18.9 meters, and their draft is 6.9 meters. They have 6 553mm torpedo tubes. Yeah. 6 21-inch torpedo tubes in 2 triples. And they have anti-submarine mortars. They carry 4 aircraft. And they serve with the Italian Navy till 1961. They're not scrapped till 1972, I think. And they're refit in 1953 with all sorts of radars, etc. So anyway, in a battle royale between ships named after Eugene Savoy, who would win? Depends. Does the cruiser use all its torpedoes and actually hit targets, or does it not? If it doesn't, then some on the other ships probably would win. Siege 90. I've seen these called the Giuseppe Garibaldi class in certain books. True, but no, we're going to call them the Abruzzis, because that's who they're named for. They're named for a gentleman who was probably... Well, let's put it this way. He died age 60 on the 18th of March, 1933. He was born 29th of January 1873. And he is from the House of Savoy. Now, why does that matter? Because, and I say this with no real love for him at all, he's one of the grandchildren of Victor Emmanuel II of Italy. He did not have a good World War II. In fact, good World War One. I'm sorry. He was Commander-in-Chief of the Italian Fleet in 1914 to 1917, based in Taranto. His flagship was the Conte de Cavour. He was responsible for saving the army of the Kingdom of Serbia. And in February 1917, he was replaced by Paolo Faon de Revel, under pressure of the British and French allies, because they considered him quite so interesting. He was promoted, as the traditional methodology is, to full admiral and promoted out of command. However, don't worry, he found a new thing to support. Because he's a rich noble and he's now bored. He becomes a member of the Explorers Club, honorary member. In 1912, he'd been made that one. But no, he is basically used by Benito Mussolini to do many diplomatic missions, including in 1928, he goes to get the Italo-Ethiopian Treaty, and he brings Addis Ababa gifts, including a Fiat 3000 tank. Presided in 1932 over the newly merged Italian line of steamships. And yeah, that was pretty much Mussolini's biggest business deal. However, the Duke had to resign after SSX Rex broke down in Gibraltar. He said it was because he couldn't achieve harmony among the executives who formerly headed the competing lines. Myself, I just don't think he was that good at his job. He'd been promoted because he was in many ways helped up by the political connections and the fact he was the grandson of a former king. It does help one get promoted. And therefore related by blood to the current king. Always fun. Okay, questions. Did it? Mm-hmm. IO2, hello. Quickly going from cold to hot like a naval gun does sound like a scenario where you need special lubricants. It makes a difference. And then when you've got the other scenarios of all the particular, how do I put this? You also got the fact salt water as a factor, but when you've got all the lubrication you need for the various parts of the mechanisms which bring the gun, bring the shells and everything up, you've got to make sure they're lubricated, and you've also got to try and make it a lubricant which isn't flammable. That can be an issue because you don't want fire breaking out, of course, for obvious reasons. So your lubricant, and also even if fire does break out, you don't want the lubricant catching light. Fun times. Holy audio spike. That was an audio spike. If there's one person in the leash name of worship out, it's Kinnaberty. Possibly. That's the French, though, who named their ships after those people. Hi, Phil Williams. Hi, Doctor. Is it true they built in wine vats, as old shipmate of mine did the first work on the Italian ship in 97? They had ashtrays fitted in the galley. Just like the French, at various points, you can get wine on tap. Is what I've read in some books. I haven't been aboard one of these older ships to be sure of that one, so it's what I've read in books. And my dad used to make the joke as well. Well, not so much the joke, but a semi-serious comment. He was on one ship. I forget if it was Italian or French, and he had 3 taps, and he thought one was for drinking water, one was for regular washing cold water, and one was for hot water. He turned on the drinking water and found himself getting wine. So right, Garibaldi was refitted with 135-45 guns, used on the Capitani Romani's 96 which became a CG. Yeah. No, please don't talk about new-fitting nuclear missiles on them. The Captain Romani was the fastest cruiser ever, wasn't he? Well, Oh, how do we put this nicely? Okay. Italian cruisers. So far they've wandered between. You had one brief moment where they had armor, and then you had the Zaras had armor, and then the ones after them didn't. And then eventually you get to the Bruises, which do have armor. At the same time as they're doing, they're doing that. Come along, the Captain Romani class, which are their own special breed of, oh my lord, what did you do now? When I say their own special breed of what did you do now, the turret armor for their armor is sit between 6 and 20 millimeters of armor on the turrets, and a conning tower of 15 millimeters. I don't think they have armor really other than that. Attilia Regula is torpedoed by HMS Unruffled and remains in dry dock for several months after that in 1942. Scipio Africano detected and engaged British motor torpedo boats in 1943. She managed to sink MTB 316, heavily damage MTD 313, and then laid down some minefields with Luigi Cadorna. But only those two, only Attilia Reglio and Scipio Africano, actually saw combat. It seems to me, from what I've seen. They had a top speed of 41 knots, so they were very, very fast. They could go 4,350 nautical miles at 18 knots. So very fast. They have 4 boilers, 2 skid steam turbines, 2 shafts, 110,000 shaft horsepower. They are basically 6-inch armed destroyers. They weigh in at 3,745 tons in standard. So their primary weapon of war is their 8 torpedo tubes. And the fact they can carry a whole lot of mines. They could carry 70 mines. But they are basically fast mine layers, which are technically called cruisers. Going on, did I hear a conning tower 20 millimeters? The armor it was 20 millimeters thick. Yes, 15 millimeters thick actually for the armor on the conning tower. 15 millimeters. The turrets was between 6 and 20 millimeters. Yes, there is various interesting things about what they're actually called. They are called ocean scouts. They are called all sorts of different phrases to get around what they are. But let's be honest, what they are is large destroyers. They are to an extent, they are very, very good destroyers, but they are not cruisers. They're a large destroyer. And yeah, we've already, as Seneca Nero has just mentioned, there's the Abdeo class, Manxman class, 40 knots. Basically, if you are building a ship which is very, very fast for mine laying, these are sort of what you build. Difference is the British basically went with destroyer armament for their Manxman class, whereas the Italians went with, we're going to fit cruiser guns on them. 6mm armor isn't actually armor. It won't even stop a 50 cal. It's just providing extra shrapnel for an incoming shell. There is certainly an argument that if you're fitting with such a armor, then you should just be fitting a mount rather than a turret. But the Italians like their turrets. No, 15mm conning tower. 15mm conning tower, not 20mm. 15mm. As a comparison, how armored were the Abdeo class? I've got those stats somewhere. What does it come from when your first thing is to go down to the start button, search? Now, the Abdils weighed in at 2,650 tons in standard, so they're about they were about 1,100 tons lighter in standard. They could do 40 knots, and let's see. Abdils had magazine, block protection, deck, side plating, turrets, bulkheads, belt, internal boiler room, sides, added between 1936 and 40. So they had armor plate, but probably not that thick. It seems to be roughly. Most of it seems to be roughly 50 millimeters, 2 inches. But they were armed with 4-inch guns rather than 6-inch. The British ones. Yeah, deals. But I like using Scipio Africanus, though. He makes sense. Yeah, he does. Captain Romani also, to an extent, makes sense. But no. Italian cruisers. So, here is the thing. What were Italian cruisers in summary? Well, they're kind of stuck between two worlds. They're either there to provide extra muscle with your battleships, and especially your status units in terms of presence, or they are basically large destroyers. And that's because ultimately, for the Italian geostrategic position, the weapon of war they can use least is the cruiser. That sounds stupid to me for me to say. It's the year of the cruiser. I like talking about cruisers. I can usually make the case for cruisers being useful for anyone. While I could make the argument for a cruiser which is, let's say, Zara style, which was 36 knots. It was 36 knots for the Italians. If you got away with actually having something with, I don't know, 12 8-inch guns, and especially the later 8-inch guns, and level or slightly better protection of a Zara class, and the necessary fuel and speed to do 36 knots, etc., and have a cruising speed of roughly 18 knots, then you would be dealing with a very, very useful vessel for the Italians. But the problem is that on 10,000 tons, you can't build that level of heavy cruiser. And there's a level of cheating you can get away with, and there's a level of cheating which you can't. And the Italians, for them, their level of cheating is even more limited because so many of their components are British built, British designed, Britain knows the stats and specifics of. Okay, some of their equipment, some of their their turbines are built under license. Some of their turbines are procured directly from Britain. Some of their boilers are built on license. Some of them are procured directly from Britain. Some they build themselves. The trouble is with the ones that they build under license or they procure from Britain, is that Britain knows what their operation figures and facts are. Of course they do. You don't build something under license without it being watched. So the Italians are far less able to cheat the system than the Japanese. They are far less able to. They try their best, but they're far less able to. And they produce good quality ships, for the most part. Though they ships you want to take in Atlantic or into war, probably not in terms of the condottieri. And let's be honest, I would prefer not to be near a Trento, and definitely not Bolzano. But the Zaras are good. What is the problem for the Italians? The problem for the Italians is that, honestly, for them, infrastructure-wise, if they'd been able to use that extra tonnage allowance of cruisers, if they, instead of building, I don't know, 70,000 tons of cruiser, they'd been allowed to build 2 extra battleships. That would have probably fitted their operational capabilities and the infrastructure a lot better. If they'd focused that construction onto destroyers, they'd have been probably far better. If they'd built a large number of destroyers and torpedo boats, big destroyers and lots of torpedo boats, they would have probably been much better. Why? Am I suggesting that, actually this is Alex saying that the Jeune École, the French young school, the idea of torpedo boats and all these things to counter battleships is the sensible idea? No. But for Italy, they need one of 2 things. They either need big ships because of the scenario they're in. When they go out, sort of, if you consider they're in the middle of the Mediterranean, if they go east, well, that means they're only going east if they're fighting the British. In which case, they need to go heavy and go hard because the British have a far larger navy. So they either need to be able to swarm them, in which case they can do with smaller ships, or they need to be able to outfight them, which is probably going to require armor to be able to stand up against them. Because they can build specialists like that, whereas the British can't afford to, because the British have to build a larger number of ships. Or they have to go west, which is the most likely one, which is fighting the French. Now, if they go west, the moment they go past the border of Libya and Algeria, which is, by the way, the border they're going to be fighting over, probably in North Africa, they are into French airspace, i.e., areas where French aerodromes aircraft can launch from. They're into areas where the French fleet will be supported. So they can make dashing raids and then they withdraw. Again, this is where high-speed ships start to make sense. But what are the French going to be moving through that area? What is they're going to be for them to be raiding? Well, if there's anything going to be raiding, it might be a military convoy, but there again, the French might also do the very simple option of assembling a convoy on the Atlantic coast, bringing it up, and then bring it into Gibraltar and along the coast of North Africa to the nearest port they could get it to where the action is, and offloading there. Which means they'll be hugging the coast of North Africa, and it might not be actually in the Mediterranean open waters for very long, and you might well have to go a long way to get to it and get out again, which gives the French fleet time to respond. Okay, so what's the other option the cruisers are going to do? Well, let's going to say they're going to fight alongside the battleships and give them the edge in any capital ship engagement, because the French have to build light ships which have numbers, etc., and can sail around the world and go out and do the fast operations outside of Europe, because they have a huge empire in the Far East, etc., to defend and all these things. So they have to deploy their ships out there. So you can build your cruisers as heavy as you like to fight alongside your battleships. Well, in which case they're going to need more armor and they're going to need more speed, as well as the firepower. They're going to need to be balanced ships. Probably not 36, 38 knot ships, but 34, 35 knots would certainly be useful. And of course, then the Zara class, well, the Italians are trying to present she's not overweight. And if they put in a third turbine and a set of boilers required to support that, it will be overweight. Hello. What's up? What are you complaining about? they won't be able to hide the fact it's overweight. Whereas, as it's built, everyone can look the other way. The British can probably figure it out from the stats they know and do, but they can't really prove it unless they start talking into a lot of maths, and it's going to get complicated. And frankly, no one wants to start a war over these things. But if you do it quite so flagrantly, then they don't have to start a war to show you up, and then you can find yourself in trouble and facing sanctions from America and everyone else, and you're suddenly the bad guy, and you're in no position to deal with that scenario. League of Nations does occasionally sanctions, but the thing is also with the naval treaties, that does involve America. League of Nations sanctions rarely actually involve America because America didn't decide to join the League of Nations. The only scenario where America might get involved in sanctions is if you break the naval treaties, which is problematic for Italy, etc., because of export market. So, Italian cruisers. When they're built really, really light, they're basically building supersized destroyers. Because that's what they're really asking to do if you consider their role. They're asking to fulfill the destroyer role. When they're built really heavy, they're basically going, we need adjuncts to the battle line. The problem for them on that scenario is the poor Zaras, 3 of them get caught by the Royal Navy battleships at night and at very close range, and they don't get much of a chance to actually be part of a battle line, because they're supposed to be assisting the battleship while the battleship engages the British battleships, and they're providing extra fire support. Not they are supposed to be the meat in the grinder facing the battleships at point blank range. Battleships backed at such close range that the aircraft carrier coming them can fire its 4.5-inch guns and feels they're in comfortable range to hit. And let's be honest, if you're in comfortable range to be hit with the fire control of an aircraft carrier and it's 4.5s, you're at point blank range for a frigating battleship. So, Italian cruisers. Presence, panache, beauty, yes. But also, ultimately, either large destroyers or, sadly, not quite what they needed, but the closest thing to a heavy cruiser you're going to see produced by any European power. Right. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I'll say any questions, and we'll see how long the fluff will be keep quiet for before he demands to go in for his dinner. Oh, before I have to get rid of a moth. Excuse me. You are not getting near the books. Moths are going towards the books. Can't have that happen. But other things to do. Sorry. Take care, Drakenrod. So build only Captain Romani's and Zara's? That would have been my plan. John Shea, apologies for the random question, but there is a thing where you name days of the week like Tomcat Thursday or Phantom Friday. What would you name days of the week related to Naval? Oh, good lord. Tugboat Tuesday. Mornington Monday. Wheelhouse Wednesday. Frigating Friday, of course. Submarine Sunday. Tribal Thursday. And what for Saturday? No. No, not that one, not that one, not that one. Super Firing Saturday. Take care, Thomas and Thank you, Percy. Chevron for a bell. Second, how realistic is my idea of a German aircraft carrier? Message Marcus Faulkner, and after he stops screaming, ask him about the Graf Zeppelin on Twitter. I think he's called at Naval History War. Looking forward to the Kirov video. I'm looking forward to the Kirov video. It's going to be good. It's also going to be the first long patrol, which is going to be recorded with all this done, hopefully. Right. They turned a 40mm gun tub into a swimming pool. Say more a hot tub than a swimming pool, but okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. And I now have a poodle who is threatening revolt because he would like his dinner. So, thank you all. Thank you for support. Thank you for super chats. Thank you for the super thanks. Thank you for all the Patreon subscribers. Thank you for everyone who's subscribed to the channel. It really wouldn't be possible without you. And thank you very much. Take care. Bye. Oh, and take care, Drakenred, John Shea, Bartzy, Seneca Nero, Thomas Enither, Knight 6831, Gogo Lander, IO2, Constant Drowsiness, William Cox, Carl Gasberg, Michael Cooch, Knight 6831, CJ 90, and HMS Verdun. Thank you, Melanie 1640. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone who's been on. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have a nice evening. And hopefully tomorrow morning's recording will be of good. Where are the patron choices? As I didn't get to read them. Oh, the patron choices are, if you go to the link down below, you'll find the patron choices. They should be, I think I did declare it open, able to be publicly read. It's only patrons who can vote, though. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, George Newman. Thank you, Dan Freeman, again. Hello, big fluffy thing. Yes, you are a big fluffy thing, aren't you? You're a big fluffy thing. And you just love to be made a fuss of. That's all you really want in life, to be made a fuss of. Good boy.